That's a good job, Overkill.
Yeah,
Alright,
I'll be right
yeah.
back.
You go stop freezing pipes. Dan's making sure his pipes don't freeze. I get it. Don't want those freezing up. Then people be like, hey, my pipes froze. And then you gotta be like, well, I'm sorry, that was because of this. It was because of this thing. It's because it's -5 outside. -10 when I went out this morning. Like, well, you let the pipes freeze. And then you're like, oh, man, I'm sorry, but I don't know what to tell you. And then they're like, I know what to tell you. Just make sure my pipes don't can freeze again. And then you're like, hey, man, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that your pipes froze. And then they're like, it's not good enough. And then they flip and kick you. And then you scream in agony because you didn't want to be kicked. You're like, no, please leave me alone. And they're like, then don't make my pipes freeze ever again. I'm gonna shank you. Got that? And you're like, yeah, man, whatever you say. And then they run off and have ice cream at Dairy Queen. And you're still recovering from getting kicked. And then you slowly start picking yourself back up. You dust yourself off. And then all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, they come flying back at you. And you get smashed, like square in the face, by that guy. And he's like, what did I tell you? And then you're like, you said don't make the pipes freeze. And then they're like, yeah, that's what I said. You know where the pipes are? They're frozen. And then you get kicked again. And then you just tears running down your face, and you're just crying, like demanding for the pain to stop. He takes out a sledgehammer, and you're like, oh no. And then he raises the sledgehammer, and comes flying down at you, and then you're like, no! And then you don't get to say anything after that because your head gets crushed really badly, and there's just like viscera everywhere. The guy drops the sledgehammer, and he walks off. He goes and he has ice cream again. He doesn't attend the funeral because, I mean, you let his pipes freeze. It's pretty bad of you, man. Don't let that happen again. Then you show up to, good old, what is that place called? Oh, Sheol, because you were Jewish. And then, the guy there, the judgmentman, I don't know what his name is, he's like, so, how did you do in your life? And then he flips open a book and he scans through it all. And then he's like, wait a minute. You were that guy that let the pipes freeze. And you're like, oh no. And then he pulls out the flippin' the Torah, and he beats you with it until you end up in the second afterlife. This one's just called Burbank, California. It's a pretty nice place, but when you die in Sheol or Hell, one of the two. If you die in heaven, you end up in Glendale, but you end up in Burbank if you died in Hell or Sheol, and you kind of just sit there. And then the garbage truck comes, and then it leaves, and then you're like, well, that was interesting. And then there's a man walking down the street. He's walking a pug. The pug kind of looks like it's having a hard time breathing, but you're not going to say anything because you're going to be the better person about this. And then here comes a man charging headfirst at you. You hear him screaming in the distance. At this point, you're just ready to give in and accept defeat. You just get destroyed. He plows right through you, and you're on the ground, bleeding again. And he's like, you're that guy who let my pipes freeze. And you're like, no, man. No, I didn't deserve this. And then he picks up a chair, and he's like, well, you're going to get this now. And then you're like, oh, no. And then you get hit with the chair. And then, actually, one of the legs goes right through your skull. Because in the second afterlife, your skull gets very squishy. You're just practically like walking around with Play-Doh on your head. So you end up dead for the third time now. There is no third afterlife. You just end up at Greg Matthews' house. And Greg Matthews is like, whoa, my name's Greg Matthews. Hey, what are you doing here? Welcome to the third afterlife. And then you're like, what is this place? He's like, this is my house. This is my mom's house. But she's out at a book club right now, so you can hang out if you want. And then he passes you a Heineken beer, and you're like, I don't drink. So he's like, no problem, man. I got Pepsi. He throws you a Pepsi, but it's a crystal Pepsi, and it's not one of the new ones. It's one of the old ones from 1980 something. You're like, do you have anything a little more fresh? And he's like, we got my mom's V8, but that's about it. But at this point, you're just too tired and too sick of life, so you're just like, I'll take the V8. Like normally you'd say no, because V8's kind of disgusting, but you decide, yeah, sure, I'll take the V8. So he pours you a glass, and you sit down on his couch, and you two are watching Jackass with Steve-O, and you take a sip, and it tastes a little weird. It might be off date by just a day or two, you think, so. I mean, you set it down, and you go in the fridge, and you take a look, and sure enough, it expired yesterday, but, I mean, it shouldn't taste that off, but, I mean, whatever. Maybe it's just you haven't had V8 in a while, maybe they changed the recipe, so you go back, take a few more sips, it's okay. It goes down alright. It's a liquid, and you're happy to have a liquid. And then he asks like where the water is. Or you ask where the water is, and he's like, "Oh, just get it from the tap." And you turn the tap, and there's just this brown sludgy water draining out. And you drop the glass, and it almost shatters in the sink, but it doesn't. They're like the plastic cups, but they've been in the wash quite a few times. They're very fragile at this point. It's not like it's glass. He doesn't have the money for glass. You think he'd have the money for glass? He's flipping Greg Matthews. And then you're like, "Hey, where do you live? I haven't been here before." And he looks you dead in the eye, and he's like, "Oh, welcome to my place. Yeah, I was able to buy this. We were able to buy this super cheap place in Flint." And you're like, "Flint is in Michigan?" He's like, "Yeah." And you kind of just look at him, and you're like, "Oh no." Because Flint, Michigan, still having the terrible water thing. Jake, throw the link to donate to the Flint water crisis thingy here. But he's like, "Oh, don't worry, man. We got some bottled stuff." And he goes out in the garage, and it's all frozen out. It's all frozen over because it's like 8 degrees outside. But you take one of the frozen bottles of water, and you kind of run it between your hands. You're just trying to get it warm, warm enough that you can start drinking from it at the very least. And he switches the channel. He turns it on to Adventure Time. He's like, "I've been watching the show since episode 1." And you're like, "I haven't seen it." So he tries to sit down and show you an episode, but it just takes forever. You don't really know what's going on or what any of the characters are. I mean, you're like, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. I thought it was more like old fantasy, but I don't know. Who's that guy? He's like, "Oh, that's the Lich, played by Ron Perlman." And you're like, "Oh, shit." Because Ron Perlman in previous life was your father. But right now, you haven't gotten to see him in so long. He probably doesn't recognize you anymore, and you barely recognize him. He looks so different than he used to be. But you get up, and now you have this plan, this task. You have to go out to California to see Ron Perlman. Unfortunately, in the previous life, you were in Burbank. You were like a walking distance from Ron Perlman's house. But now, it's a great big expedition. You have to get on an Amtrak train. You have to stop at Union Station. That has to transport you all the way to California. That's going to take you a few days. You're not sure if you'll be able to make the trip or not, especially because you're now in your like 4th or 3rd afterlife, one of the 2 numbers. But you get out, and it's just this big black empty void on all sides. It's just Greg Matthews' house, and there's no way out. So you realize you really can't go and visit Ron Perlman and get to say hi and maybe trigger some thoughts about a previous afterlife. So at that point, you're kind of just bummed. You don't know what to do. You pick up a rock that was in his driveway, say the gravel driveway, and you throw it out into the void, and you just kind of watch it go forever. You get really bummed because it's been so long since you got to see anybody except for Greg Matthews. So you sigh, and then all of a sudden you hear some more screaming and running. You turn around, and it's that same guy that you froze his pipes so long ago. He punches you square in the face, and you fall into the void, and you're falling for hours and hours. It goes on forever. You look on all sides, and there's nothing around you, and you just think to yourself, "Well, I think I had this coming. If only I hadn't froze those pipes. If I'd been out there to make sure the pipes didn't freeze, then I wouldn't be in this mess right now." And you just fall for hours and hours and days, months and years. About 4 decades pass, and then you land on the ground. You're back where you were in front of Greg Matthews' house, and it's exactly how you remember it being. Nothing has really changed. They've got a new American flag. The one that they had was a little tattered and discolored, but this one's brand new. You can clearly tell. There's still a price tag and a UPC label on it. You peel the price tag off for him, just be a nice guy. You walk inside. Greg Matthews is still watching Adventure Time, although now it's a different episode. You don't recognize any of the characters again. You hear a couple voices that you remember from TV, but nothing very important. He offers you a Heineken again, but you turn it down because, he already offered you one to go, and you said you don't drink, and he respects that. So then he asks what else you like for a drink, and then he looks in the fridge, and now he's got this Mountain Dew. The Mountain Dew is pretty fresh, so you're like, "I'll take the Mountain Dew." And then he's like, "Okay, sure, I'll pour you a glass of Mountain Dew." But then he opens it up, and out come these little chunks of Mountain Dew. They're like gelatinous cubes that kind of just pour out into the cup and kind of just go everywhere. And you just look him dead in the eye with just the absolute nightmarish terror and horror. You can't believe what you're looking at. And he's like, "Oh, do you want a glass?" And you're like, "No." You just look him dead in the eye and you go, "No, never again." And he's like, "Okay, your loss." And he sits down and he just opens his mouth and he just grabs a couple of the cubes and he chomps on them. And you just hear this squishy nyam 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 noise. And you're like, "Oh my god." But anyways, he's like, "It's delicious. Are you sure you don't want it? Hey, just bought it today." And you look out the window and there's absolutely nothing out there. There's no way he could have bought that today or yesterday or any day. There's no way he could have ever even bought that. That had to have been there from the moment that this incorporeal place was actually materialized. So, you really don't have any other options. You say, "Yeah, sure, I guess. I'll take a small glass." You grab yourself a fork from out of his mother's cupboard and you start stirring it. You're trying to just break up the gelatinous cubey things. And and it goes all right. But now you just have this like sludgy Mountain Dew, disgusting mess. So you're kind of just like trying to drink it, and it just doesn't go well. Man, Jesus Christ, what was that? Jake, Jake, you have a bunch of miscellaneous filler. Oi.